Each night it took a piece of him. Written by AuthorJoJo. Life for me was a juggling act. I would try to balance out being chronically ill with living a life that was worth fighting for. I'd put on a mask and venture out into the world, pretending that it didn't take me an hour just to pull myself out of bed, or that I needed to swallow a cocktail of pills just so my bones wouldn't ache. One thing I found solace in, something that got me away from the sickness I had for longer than I could remember, was dating. I could swipe through potential matches without having to get out of bed, and when I made plans, I would get as pretty as possible, and for one night, I would forget that there was anything wrong with me. It was always a first date, though. There would never be a second. I didn't want to let anyone care about me, have to struggle just as I did. My pain was supposed to be my own. That was going to be the plan until my illness would take my life, which, according to various doctors, wouldn't be that far off. That was the plan. But then there was Roy. One night, one drink between the two of us, and the idiot went and took a liking to me. Something I wished I could have fought off, but I took a liking to him as well. That stupid fool. We saw each other more and more. I let him into my world slowly. He listened intently when I mentioned the tools I had to combat my pains. He planned trips for us, things we could do that wouldn't strain my body more than needed. We would spend nights watching horror movies, and mornings taking trips through the countryside where I could feel clean air press against my face. I didn't know how many years I had left, but I spent a number of them with Roy by my side. My parents were positively beaming when they got to watch their little girl get married. They probably thought they'd never see me like that. Roy was more than I could have ever asked for. Even as the years ticked by and I grew sicker, he remained by my side. Through sickness and in health, right? This year, my health took a turn for the worse, and it got difficult to even do the most mundane activities. To feel relief, I'd have to take so many pills I would damn near turn into a zombie. Roy tried to remain strong, but I could see the sorrow swimming in his pale blue eyes. I could see him watching me wither away. Still, he stayed. Helped me any way he could. I even started to fix the room up and made being stuck there as comfortable as possible, setting up a big TV so we could still sit up and watch movies as we used to. Although the things he did were great, there was only so much that he could do. At least that's what I thought. Over the last month, I found myself waking up alone. It would be in the middle of the night, stars still littering the sky. I would call out for Roy, but only heard my voice echoing through empty rooms. The ringing of an unanswered telephone was normally enough white noise to lull me back to sleep. Whenever I woke up, there he would be. If I asked where he went, he would either convince me I was dreaming, or just tell me he went out to pick some things up when he couldn't sleep. Of course, I began to worry. He had done so much for me. Was it unfair or selfish that I grew resentful? That the thought he was sneaking out to see someone burned so bright in my heart? Is it worse that I wanted him to just be with her? Whatever figure I imagined in my mind, wrapping their arms around him. It would be easier for him if he never came back home, and just let what little petals I had left wilt away in silence. I wasn't wrong with my assumptions. Well, not entirely. I stopped bringing up my concerns over his whereabouts and resigned to just letting it happen. I didn't know what he was looking for all those nights or who he was meeting with. I only know the aftermath of his actions. He never shared what happened during his nights away from me, and the more it dwells in my mind, the less I want to know. All I know is the aftermath. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and being surprised to see that Roy was still laying in the bed with me. It had become so routine that he'd be gone that it scared me to see him laying on his back, slight slivers of light reflecting off his eyes. He was just laying there next to me, staring at the ceiling. It felt like we were being watched. I looked out the window, expecting someone to be peering back at me. My skin was crawling, and I was beginning to worry I was suffering through sleep paralysis as the pressure built in my chest. Trying to shake the fear off, I shifted my weight to roll over, hoping that Roy would respond to my movements. As I rolled over, my vision shifted from the window to the TV Roy had installed in the wall, and then to the wall opposite the window. Something didn't feel right. Even though I had just rolled over, it felt like I was forgetting something that I had seen, like I was missing a piece of information. That something was out of place in the room I had grown so accustomed to. Slowly, I altered my gaze, retracing the visual information I had just absorbed until my neck had craned enough to look at the TV. The moonlight that had gleamed over Roy's eyes was also reflecting off the TV's black screen. Blocking that reflecting light was a figure. Something standing tall at the foot of our bed. My heartbeat started pounding at my chest, and even though it pained me a great deal to do so, I quickly turned back over to Roy. He was still just looking at the ceiling. I went to open my mouth to tell him about the intruder, but his words cut off mine. My words were full of panic, but his were calm and planned, like they were sitting just behind his closed lips, waiting to come out. "Do you remember?" he started. His words caught me off guard, as I hadn't realized how quiet the room was. "When we went to see my parents," he continued. It was then, looking at him, the light that was slipping through the window became obstructed. The figure that was at the foot of the bed had made its way beside Roy. We were taking that back road and it started to rain. His words became background noise as I tried to nudge him, trying to make him see the intruder, even though I could hardly see it. The thing didn't take on a physical form. The only way it represented itself was with the blocking of a light source, like the moon piercing through the window. It got so bad that we had to pull over. I could watch the blocked light shift and something resembling an arm moving around on the figure. "So you opened the door and got out?" Roy chuckled, his words choked up by the saliva pooling in his throat. The creature, or whatever it is, continued moving its arm, blocking out the light behind it, until it rested on Roy's leg. "I asked you to get back in. You said you wouldn't until I came out and danced with you." It hurt too much. If Roy wasn't going to move, I couldn't make him, and without my medication, I was in no shape to get out of bed. I just watched, soaking in his words as the thing's hand seeped into Roy's leg. There was no blood, no screaming, and no gaping wound. The thing's arm just went inside his leg and came back out. We were still drying out when we reached my parents' place. The car was soaked. He laughed, and I did too. I always liked how the rain felt on my skin. Every time I smelled the rain from inside my room, I would think of that night. I wonder if Roy knew that. Despite my laughter, the thing lifted its arm high enough to show me what it had retrieved. In the intruder's shadowy hand was a vapor. It was hard to make out. It was similar to how heat waves coming off a grill can distort the air, make it all wavy. Like I couldn't see it, but I knew something was there, that it had gotten something. Roy turned to face me. The light reflected so well off his eyes, a small layer of tears covering each of them. His smile was warm, though. He wasn't just asking me if I remembered that night. He was reliving it in his head. I think about it all the time. Somehow, through the fear I felt and the confusion wrapping around my mind, the memories of that rain and his wet cheek against mine were enough to safely whisk me into sleep. When we woke up, the night's events went unmentioned. Even as Roy sat at the edge of the bed, bracing himself to stand, I couldn't bring myself to ask about any of it. It felt like he didn't want to get into it. I just wish I knew how he felt about it. Was he afraid? Was he relieved? What was going through his head when he went out all those nights? Instead of dwelling on it, we spent the day together, just like it was any other day. I asked about work, to which he replied he took some time off to spend with me. A pleasant surprise, but given the night before, a troubling one. Do you remember? He started once again that very night. I was drifting in and out of sleep and almost failed to notice the being had returned to his side of the bed. We went karaoke singing at that weird bar. Again, the thing lifted its arm as Roy continued. You were so bad at singing that song. God, what was it? I saw his eyes darting around like the answer was going to be printed on the ceiling. Table for one. The words dripped out of my mouth. I could see a smile creep across his face as the picture in his mind completed. Yeah, you swore you could do better, so you just kept singing the same song over and over. The being that once again invaded our room pressed its hand down. This time, its limb fell into Roy's other leg. I watched thin wrinkles form on Roy's face as the creature dug around in his leg. The wrinkles betrayed his attempted calm demeanor. It was hurting him. Everyone at the bar started cheering you on. Again, they shouted when the song ended. I tried my best to ignore the visible signs of what he was experiencing. I just let myself be carried away in his words. Eventually, you started slurring your words, but you kept going, till everyone left and the bar closed. It's funny, I remember that night. I remember waving back and forth, fighting the alcohol that I wasn't supposed to drink. I sang that song more times than I cared to admit, but I can't remember a single word from that song. I just remember watching Roy cheer me on from the sidelines. Do you remember? Roy chimed in the next night. I knew it was back this time. I had given up with the idea of trying to fight it. I was too weak, and whatever Roy had set into motion, he showed no intent in stopping it. when we bought all those snacks? The ones we said should last us a few weeks, I replied. I figured that it might have been lonely if he just heard his voice, that he would want to know that these memories he had were shared between us. That's when we caved in and finally bought Netflix, he continued. The creature slowly lowered its hand and plunged it into Roy's right arm. We had to catch up on Stranger Things because your mom wouldn't stop nearly spoiling it. His words stuttered and his breath was caught between his teeth. I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't help but notice. Roy was getting weaker. It didn't seem to faze him at all the first night, but while the creature shifted through Roy's arm, I felt the blankets beside me tighten up as Roy gripped them. He was being as strong as he could, so I didn't call him out on it, just pretended to not notice. Those snacks never saw the light of day. His laughter was more forced. It was genuine, I'm sure, but it was harder to get out. Ignoring the pain that it brought on, I moved my hand and rested it on his chest as the creature retrieved what it was looking for. Another clump of vapors gripped in its shadow, another piece of Roy. Roy's movements were labored. It took him longer to get out of bed, and I caught him sneaking a few of my pills when he left the bathroom door open. I don't think he knew I could see him. It pained me to see how much weight he was carrying, how much more he started to resemble me as each night went by. The following night, we went over another memory as the creature returned and began to search through Roy's left arm. It had to lean over the bed and get a good angle, and I thought I could see the thing a little clearer. Although there wasn't much to it, just that empty pocket it existed in seemed more refined. "Do you remember?" Roy said. And I did. I remembered every bit of it. All about how our third date was an absolute disaster. How the waiter spilled wine all over the white dress I had bought specifically for that date. I remembered Roy forgetting his card at the restaurant and failing to remember it until we pulled into his driveway, an hour from the restaurant. I managed to trip getting out of the car, scraping up my knee. Not exactly how I was going to convince you to come in, I mimicked the words he said after helping me to my feet that night. I watched as the wrinkles on his face portrayed joy instead of the fierce pain he must have been feeling. Truth is, though, I loved that date, and without it, I don't think I would have stayed the night. I made sure to tell Roy that before the creature pulled another piece from him. Roy couldn't be strong anymore. As the thing reeled its arm back, Roy arched his back and let out a howl as I had never seen before. It was like the thing was pulling the skin right from Roy's arm. All I could do was hold him, my face causing dark spots to appear on his white t-shirt. I didn't want him to know I was crying. For once, I wanted to be strong for him. We just spent the next day in bed, talking to each other and talking through all the years we had spent together, only ever getting out to use the bathroom or to open the door for the delivery driver. A box of pizza laid between us as we thought about names for our kids, where we would like to live and what we would do to fill our time when we were old and gray. But we both knew one of us would never make it to see those days. I didn't want it to come. I wanted to hold the world in place, stop the moon and the stars, and just live in that sunlight forever. Slowly, though, the world outside did shift. Bright blue skies gave way to soft ambers and lilac until the day became night. Its gaze wrapped around my body before I saw it creep to the side of Roy. Without hesitation, the thing rose its arm and dropped it into Roy's chest. "Do you remember how we met?" Roy asked. His breath was light and raspy. His words were fading. I nodded my head in response. "Why don't you tell me about it?" His eyes closed as my mouth opened. "I was there to meet a date," I began, reaching over to grab Roy's hand, hoping he could still feel it. His fingers gripped mine like I was dangling off some cliff and he was trying to pull me up. I sat for over an hour waiting for this guy who never showed, so frustrated I walked over to the bar. The creature continued rooting around in Roy's chest as my memories flooded through the night air. The only open seat was next to some smelly guy who had just gotten off a long shift. Guy said his name was Roy. Roy chuckled through clenched teeth. "I didn't have a choice really, so that's where I sat. You offered to buy me a drink, and I guess I let you. It was just one drink." I closed my eyes too. I brought myself back to the bar, not wanting to watch that thing anymore. I could see the dim lights and feel the bar's stuffy air. Roy's hands were cold as the beer he bought me. Just one drink. We got to talking. You let me vent my frustration. You wanted to listen, but I made you talk eventually. When you opened up, Roy, I could feel it, even through his closed eyelids, a small stream of liquid pouring down my face, a soft ringing in my ears as I tried to fight the lump that was forming in my throat. It felt so safe when I listened to you talk, Roy. The death grip he had on my hand started to loosen, and I could feel his tense body starting to relax. Just me and you, just one glass of beer. That took me 3 hours to drink. I remember it, Roy, every bit. I'll never forget it. With my eyes opened, we exchanged a glance. I don't know where he went all those nights, but I know now what he was looking for. Through the sorrow and pain, I pulled my face up to his and kissed him before that thing could pull the peace out of him. "Do you remember?" Roy whispered to me. "That I love you?" "I do. How could I ever forget?" When the thing pulled that final piece from Roy, I watched as his eyes closed and the smile he had been holding started to relax. And by the morning, Roy was gone. The thing just left the room and hasn't been back since. Unsure of what to do next, I laid in bed until I couldn't anymore. When I prepared for the lengthy journey that would be leaving my bed, I came to find no agony in my shifting body. I rose out of bed like there was never a trace of my illness, like all those painful pieces of me had been ripped right out. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to live a life without the aches that plagued me for so long. Even after I watched Roy lowered into the ground, not a single word that he said to me has left my head. Not a single memory. It will have its struggles, but I'm going to take advantage of the change of life that Roy gave to me. A chance at seeing the world without my sickness. Not moving forward, not trying to live the rest of my life would be a complete betrayal of the man I love. Soon, it'll be our anniversary. I think I'm going to take a trip to that bar and have a drink. Just one drink. Thanks very much to AuthorJoJo for letting me read his beautiful story. Have a good night, everyone. Love, the Mistress.